The following audio recording has been designed for learning purposes only. Do not share, distribute, or provide any type of copies, or this audio lesson will not be made available to you. Good luck with today's lesson.
Okay, we're going to get started here. Let me pause the old music. Welcome back. Hope everybody's doing very fine on this wonderful and terrific Tuesday evening. We're going to start talking kind of right away today because we've got a bit of information that I want to cover, and I want to also make sure that you've got some time in class to really kind of work on and further your controller animations that you've been diligently creating. So the thing we're going to look at tonight is Cinema 4D interaction. I want to get into that for a few minutes with you and then show you some of the resources we have in that arena so that you can start to further your interests in that area and some of the reasons actually that you might want to do that. But more importantly, we're going to get back into our controller here and talk about ways to animate our scenes so that we can have some interactivity happening with the elements that we've built. Now this is going to give us a chance to look at things like setting up controllers. And when I say controllers, I'm not referring to the controller that's on screen. I'm actually talking about controls that we can build into After Effects so that we don't have to search out layers. Okay? As we know, there's a bunch of pieces going on in this little demonstration here that we're going to add to today. And to be able to get to these individual buttons, let's say, to animate them would be a trick in and of itself. Okay, because we have to navigate and find the right layer, and even with naming that can be a pain. And then setting keyframes, the only way we're going to find those keyframes is if we either mark the layer with a marker or change the highlight color. And although those methods will work, that's kind of a pain in the tailbone. So we're going to look at how to set up controllers that allow us to move all of those different types of animation that we would want to have in our controller to a single null. That way we can add keyframes, we know exactly where all our animation is, we can more interactively and creatively control what's happening in our animation, and all it's going to take is a little bit, just a tiny sprinkling of code-based expression knowledge. Okay? And I mean it. We're talking like if we had a salt shaker and we did this, it would be like half of this. Okay? Of understanding code, and you'll be able to use this technique and really make the process of animating for yourselves a lot easier. Okay, so definitely key into what we're talking about. Pardon the pun, but I have to make them because I'm a motion design instructor, right? I have to make puns like that. Plus, I'm a dad. It's a legal responsibility to make little goofy puns like that. Okay, so let's get started now. We're going to jump over to our handout for a second. This is obviously the handout for our lesson, and there are things here that we've talked about, but then there are some other things that we haven't had a chance to talk about. And one of those things is not just a thing, it's a person by the name of E.J. Hassenfratz, and I swear to you that's his name. Okay, he is an animator in the motion design arena. He's a very popular and talented animator. He started out as an After Effects animator and kind of moved into 3D through motion design and primarily requests from clients. You know, people wanting more and more and more 3D quote-unquote like animation for their motion designs. Okay, there used to be a time when After Effects could pretty much handle any task that you would be asked to accomplish. Nowadays, that's not quite true any longer. As a motion designer, there's several programs that you're going to be using hand in hand all of the time. And if After Effects was the peanut butter, Cinema 4D would be the grape jelly. If you like strawberry, leave the room now. I'm kidding. Don't go anywhere. Who likes strawberry jam instead of grape jelly? What the hell happened to you, poor people? Who hurt you? No, I'm kidding. That's A-okay. Both are great. But you can't have the peanut butter and the jelly without one or the other. And in the motion design realm, that means After Effects and Cinema 4D are both programs you're going to have to get comfortable with. Which is why, even though we are not requiring the use of Cinema 4D in Project 4, I am talking about it. Okay? You need to know about the software. You need to know where it is and how to access tools to help you understand it, because at some point you will be asked to use that software as a motion designer. I would highly recommend that everybody in here take the Intro to 3D class 2510. How many people in here have already heard that before? Raise your hand. A couple of you have already heard that before. Probably from one of the two meetings that you were forced to attend, where we shanghaied you and forced you to listen to our what sounded like sales pitches, and I'm sorry about that if it did. But in all seriousness, and putting aside the sales pitch, any class or resource that gets you more heavily involved in Cinema 4D, as motion designers using After Effects, that's an important resource. And outside of our program, outside of 2510, there are other avenues that are either low cost or no cost alternatives that won't give you what a classroom will, but will give you a lot of information that you can utilize. Okay, EJ happens to dabble in both arenas, and by both arenas I'm talking about low-cost education and also no-cost education. Okay, right on your handout on page 2, because I wanted to make sure that it was tattooed into this class, is a link to a site called iDesign. And of course, it's spelled E-Y-E, and then design is spelled like a monster spelled it, as opposed to spelling out the word properly. And that's because we in the art field, A, can't spell, and B, think we're clever, as you've already probably put together. And EJ will be the first one to tell you that he probably shouldn't have made that his URL. But since it's done, you can't undo it, and therefore he has to live with it forever. Even in the afterworld, or the afterlife, or the after whatever, he's going to get stuck with his moniker. And if you go to his site, iDesign, with the goofy name, there is a plethora, to quote Three Amigos, of various tutorials. Good movie, right? Such a great movie. Three Amigos, that's your homework, by the way. There is a plethora of information regarding Cinema 4D and its interaction with After Effects, and in some cases, just really good, solid Cinema 4D based tutorials. He is literally the Andrew Kramer / video co-pilot guy of Cinema 4D. And he started out, in a sense, like everybody in this room. He started out with After Effects. He was a 2D motion designer. He loved After Effects. He used it all the time. He did basically everything that he could ever come up with in animation using After Effects. And then over time, he just migrated from one program to the next. And with good reason. There are a lot of great and awesome aspects to using Cinema 4D, not just 3D, but Cinema 4D in general. For those of you that really like After Effects based on this class, you'll find the interface inside of Cinema 4D very similar to After Effects once you get used to it. It takes a little bit getting used to working in a 3D environment, but once you do, it starts to feel very much like After Effects. And you'll see examples of that if you take a look at the bonus video that I put out there for you guys for this lesson. Okay? But checking out this site and looking at these tutorials and his little intro to CD stuff or C4D stuff, really, really, really useful. Okay? In fact, this class that he teaches through School of Motion is probably the best Cinema 4D class next to mine. Because of course I can't say it's better than mine, because that's just sacrilege. Okay? But it's actually better than mine. It's better than anybody's, because he's a master. And if you were to go through School of Motion and take the class, it would cost you, I think it's $1,000 for a 10-week session. It's all taught online, so you don't have to go anywhere or be in the right state or city to be able to take the class. And they offer it several times a year. I think there's like 4 sessions per year. Not school year, but actual year. So from January to December, I'm pretty sure they offer it about 4 times, maybe 5, but I'm almost positive that it's 4. So it would be well worth your time to check that class out, especially in conjunction with what we do in the motion design specialty here at Macomb. Okay. Now, I'm bringing up EJ, because if you do take my advice and you go through this little process of checking things out to see what he has to offer. Like I said, there are several tutorials here that will benefit you. And then there are a few that will tie directly into what we're learning. Like this little, let's click on this, come on you. This little tutorial right here, okay? Creating cell-style animations in Cinema 4D Lite. Why is that impressive for us? Because Cinema 4D Lite, I'm not sure why these videos are doing this in my browser right now. They won't do those in years later. Cinema 4D Lite is the free software that's built right inside of After Effects that we can get to simply by going into File, going down to New, and choosing Maxon Cinema 4D File. Okay, once we do that and save the file that we're about to create and import into After Effects, so let's just call this demo, and we'll save this to the desktop. Once we do that, Cinema 4D Lite launches and then opens up, and you've got a whole 3D software package in front of you that can do loads of animation. This information that you would create right inside of here can't be accessed outside of After Effects for render. Okay, you can build scenes right inside of Cinema 4D Lite. You can save scenes right inside of Cinema 4D Lite, but you can't render information directly out of Cinema 4D Lite. That's why it's free. The only way to be able to get the information out of this software is to bring it into After Effects. Okay? Now, let's take a look at what that means very quickly. So I'm going to bring up, I'm going to Guy Fieri this thing. Maybe he's the wrong person to bring up. I'm going to Bobby Flay this thing. There we go. That sounds a little better.
Nah, Guy Fieri.
Guy Fieri's okay?
Yeah.
Are we allowed to like him, or are we supposed to hate him?
I love Guy Fieri.
He's got that goofy hair, and it makes me wonder if one of these days he's going to end up on the bad list. Uma Thurman's list from Kill Bill.
Yeah.
That would be bad, right? Don't get on that list. So let's go into this folder. Let's pull up a Cinema 4D file. Like
Arya's list from Game of Thrones.
that would be a bad one too, especially if I knew more about Game of Thrones, which makes me sound like a monster, I'm sure, and I apologize for that. Let's grab these two files. I might have to open up a different one. But right on the desktop, I've got a file that I can open right inside of Cinema 4D Lite, so I can show you all the things that you can do right inside the software. Oh, I knew it was one or the other. You can open up and look at an old school television. Yeah, look at that. That's from a different lesson. That's down the road. We want this guy right here. There we go. So this was created entirely inside of Cinema 4D Lite, this little switch controller here. In fact, this is the thing that you'll see created if you watch that little video that I was describing earlier, the bonus video for this lesson. And that video also gets into how to use Cinema 4D Lite, the basic controls so that you can kind of fly through the viewport with ease and navigate your scene and set things up so that you can really get your money's worth out of the software, which in this case is, again, nothing because it's free with After Effects. Okay. This kind of modeling that you see here is known as spline-based modeling. Okay. Spline-based modeling is basically the exact same thing that we're doing right inside of After Effects right now, which is why I want you to see this. We have a few more tools in here that we can play with. We've got a bunch of what we call parametric shapes inside of Cinema 4D Lite. These are primitives, but things like spheres and toruses and oil tanks and pill shapes and flat discs and all sorts of stuff, pyramids that we couldn't build inside of After Effects, we can build here. Okay? But using extrudes, which is what spline-based extrusions are all about, that's something that we are doing right inside of After Effects, and it's the same process being utilized here to make this switch. Okay? Right inside of Cinema 4D Lite. And again, it's a three-dimensional tool that builds three-dimensional models. We can go nuts playing around with this. This makes me want to go home and play the Switch right now. Okay? Now, to get this into After Effects, it's as simple as bringing any other footage into After Effects. Okay? So if I double-click and select this Switch controller and click Open, that drops right into my project panel. This is not a rendered file. Okay? Normally you'd have to render out or make frames from the 3D file in another program like Maya or even Cinema 4D if you didn't know about this interaction. But I can bring any Cinema 4D file directly into After Effects, drop this into a composition, and then doing so makes all of the elements inside of Cinema 4D show up right inside of After Effects. Now, we're not seeing this because we're using the Cinema 4D camera. I'm going to switch over to Comp Camera. And then I can add my own, and I should be able to see this model. Let's flip over to Centered Comp Camera. And that's going to actually move this scene as soon as the scene catches up here. So come on, After Effects. Catch up. Boop, 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 boop. Let's double check our scene here, make sure that everything's turned on. All this is good, so we should be A-OK. We got a lot of cameras and elements in here, and that might be causing a little bit of confusion. So I think what I'll do to save time, instead of trying to tech this little issue, is I'm going to take this model, I'm just going to copy it, I'm going to put it into the file that we just created, our demo file, which is right here on the desktop. I'm just going to paste it right in there. And it's probably a coordinates issue, which I'm guessing it probably is, so we'll just set these back to their origin point. So that sits right in the middle of the file. We'll hit save. We'll jump back here. And we'll dump this bad boy. And we want this demonstration right there. Boop. Let's drop that in there. And now, let's click on Centered Comp Camera, and we're going to add a camera. We'll click OK. And look at that. Cool, cool, cool. Always something with you in the After Effects. What's turned off here? Boop, 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 boop. Let's turn on that cord. Yeah. I love it when a plan comes together. Is what I would love to say right now. Come on. We had a licensing problem earlier today with Cinema 4D, and I'm hoping that's not what's going on here, because that should have been fixed. Okay, so let's try this. That shows up. Let's jump back over here. I probably should have just remodeled the entire thing very quickly, because it seems like that would be faster than what's happening right now. So these show up. Let's drop our model into here. Boop, 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 boop. Hello. And we're going to take this and align it with one of these objects. I actually like this in here because it kind of fits with our little game trees. Let's make this larger. right there. Save this guy. There you are. Now it's showing up. I was being so weird, I'll never know. Let's take a look at our position and everything. That looks good. I'm going to make a new null here and get rid of the old one. There we go. Okay, so let's zoom in on this. Let's save again. There we go. Now things are looking good. I'll bet you it was that null. Now that we deleted that null, things are working. So Cinema 4D camera. In fact, let me do this, because now I think I have to prove to everybody that this other file worked. That's always fun. Let's jump back over here. Let's reopen that cool file that we pulled out of nowhere. I bet it was animated. That's probably what it was. There we go. Yep, that makes sense. So let's re-import that bad boy again now that we got all this stuff rocking and rolling. I'm going to go all in and say it's more than likely the fact that it was animated. So let's just delete all this other stuff out. Let's re-import this bad boy. Watch things work. Look how confident he is. Bada bip, bada boop. We're going to drop that there. All right, there's our controller. So with this object inside of After Effects, right now we're looking through the Cinema 4D camera. I'm going to do what I did a second ago and add a new camera. This camera is an After Effects camera. And I want this camera to navigate around my scene. So I can do that using Cineware. Okay? So I didn't have to render out this model. I didn't have to do anything fancy. I did have to delete some animation that was apparently on the null that I must have forgotten about. But after doing that, everything showed up the way that it's supposed to. And now I can start to play around with this. Okay? It looks a little though. If I zoom in, we've got this ugly grid, right? That green is the background color. We can change that to whatever we want. Let's maybe make that a purple color. I like purple. Yeah, there we go. But this object looks pretty rough, right? We can see those rough edges, those aliased edges. It almost looks like a screen preview. And that is essentially what we're seeing. In Cinema 4D, if we look at this object, it looks the same way in here, because this is how the viewport shows us the 3D. Okay? And this looks good, but it's obviously not what we'd want in a final render. To make this look like how it would look in a final render, we actually have to render this in After Effects. We can't do this in Cinema 4D and then save it out, but we can do this in After Effects and save it out. And to get this to render, I'm going to select Software and choose Standard Final. And it'll take a second or two, maybe longer than a second or two. And then this will drop away, our grid, and the image will look much cleaner. And there it is. Okay, now that looks nice, right? We got that cool ambient occlusion, which is the shadowing we're seeing around these edges. That looks really nice. We've got shadows that are actually being cast from multiple lights that are in the scene inside of Cinema 4D, and those are looking really nice. Okay, but I can't move around this myself right now. Okay, even if I grab my camera and try to orbit around this bad boy, nothing's happening. Okay, and that's because Cineware is not allowing my camera to affect the scene. So let's go back into Software View. Let's go under Camera and choose Comp Camera, and that's going to shoot the object way away from the camera, way over there. Okay, and that's because we're now using the coordinates inside of After Effects with the Cinema 4D file. Okay, if we go back to Cinema 4D and I click on this null object, you can see there's coordinates here, right? 884, negative 568, and negative 127. Okay, After Effects is picking up on those same values. and using them as well, which is why the object is 1,000,000 miles away from view. So let's change these. If we're using After Effects coordinates, we know that the middle of a 1920 by 1080 frame is roughly 960 by 540. So let's type 960 and then negative 540 because we're going beneath the 0 axis, or I should say the 0 plane for the y-axis. And then Z, let's just set that to 0. And then we'll click Apply. And this object should have flown across the screen. So let's back up and double check by making a new object right about there. And yep, good. Okay, so that's there. And that means that this has moved up, and now we're going to hit the Save key and jump back to here. And right now, if we look at our coordinates, right? So let's bring up position and anchor point. Our point of interest is right at those same coordinates. So if we try to spin around this object, right, that's in the center of the screen. Now it looks super duper far away. It's actually not far away. It's just really, really tiny because it was built small, let's say, inside of Cinema 4D. So let's go back over to Cinema 4D. Let's grab this object. And in here, we're going to scale it up. Now, we scale things in Cinema 4D by using the scale tool, which we can get to by hitting the C key. Let's click on the right object, too. There we go. And let's just keep making this larger and larger until it's pretty big. There we go. And then we'll rebalance our screen here. Save that bad boy right next to some lights. So maybe we'll turn off these lights in a minute as well. Or we'll wait and see what it looks like. But now, when it re-updates, it looks like it should. And we can move around. And we're using the AE camera to do this right now. Just like if we were working with a three-dimensional object that we created inside of After Effects. And let's say I animate my camera. Let's set some keyframes here. Let's go to 2 seconds. Let's just turn this like so. Set another keyframe and then end our preview right there. So now we've got an object that we can animate a camera around. Okay? And again, we probably want to change or at least add a curved motion path to the position of our camera. We can do that very easily by going into Top View, checking out where our camera is, selecting these points, and just giving this an arc. Maybe we'll push this over here too, try to align these. And based on the arc, that looks pretty good. We should get a nice little move there, and we'll select these keyframes. We'll ease them. And let's grab our position keyframes like we do. And let's just give those a nice slow start, and then speed up in the center, and then slow down when we go to land. That feels like the right kind of animation for this. And then we'll go back to active camera, and we'll see what that gives us. And we just adjusted our camera path around a three-dimensional item from Cinema 4D. And that's pretty cool. Now here's where it gets even cooler. I can select this object, set this to standard draft to get a better look without the wireframe background as to how this is going to look. It still looks rough, but it shows me a better view at least, so I can get a feel for color and lighting. Or I can go right to standard final if I think this is good enough. This takes probably maybe 15 to 30 seconds per frame, so the RAM preview is going to take longer. But I can set this to final and then perform a RAM preview at maybe half resolution. We're at full resolution, so let's do half. And this is Cinema 4D inside of After Effects, rendering per frame the animation so that I can see it nice and clean. Okay? And again, you can see that it's taken a while. We're only at 5 frames right now for our RAM preview over 2 seconds, which is roughly 60 frames. Right about here, there it goes, we're going to start to see movement. And maybe we'll let this go to 1 full second just so that you can see a little bit of this animation, and that'll make sense. But this is all Cinema 4D Lite. We haven't done a thing inside of After Effects except animate a camera. We theoretically or hypothetically built this entire thing using the same techniques that we're learning right now inside of After Effects, only with extrusions inside of Cinema 4D. And that's impressive. So let's play this back. And this would be our render quality, obviously, as well. So we would set this to standard final, we'd hit render, and we'd be all done. But what if I wanted to add some things to this scene that were After Effects items? Let's say I want to go layer new text and, add something cool. Let's do that. We have to add something cool. Let's maybe make this smaller. Let's get rid of that goofy stroke. And let's make this 3-dimensional, okay? So we've got type. Let's say we want the type right in the center of the scene. So let's make this center justified. And then we'll move this kind of right there. Okay, right now, because we're at the center of the scene, this actually looks like it could be sitting on the screen, this type. Okay, so let's run with that. Let's take this type and make it look like it's sitting on the screen. So we'll double click this. We'll hit the return key. We'll grab this and maybe just make the font a little bit smaller. Go 72. There we are. So I could add elements right on the screen if I wanted to. Okay? But what if I wanted to simply just add some type that's not on the screen? So something like that. And let's make this maybe 150. Let's make sure that this is pulled out. Yeah, it's negative 284. Let's make this maybe negative 300. There we go. And let's give this type of thickness. So if we go under geometry options for the type, we can give this a depth. We can even give this a bevel. And now we can add lights, but we already have lights, and those lights are on the object, okay, our switch. So check this out. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to select my switch controller layer. There's information inside of Cinema 4D that we're not using. We can see the model, but we're not using the lights from Cinema 4D. I click Extract, and those lights come directly into After Effects.
Nice.
It is nice, right? Now I can grab these lights and either use them as is from Cinema 4D or maybe manipulate them slightly. Like I'm going to grab them and pull them back just a little bit. Maybe even turn some of them down if they're too bright, or turn a couple of them off. Right? I want this to feel like the same lighting from one external source. So let's maybe turn that light down. We turn that one down as well. We'll leave our ambient light on. That's casting that blue on the edge there, and it's also getting the same blue on the side of our type. Now we can grab these two lights and make sure that they are turned off, and they are, that's good. And then we'll grab this light, which is probably the one that's causing the most guff. We'll back that up, turn that one down as well. And now if we move around the shot, all of this is working together. Okay? Now that bevel thickness, we got to lower that. That just looks weird. So we'll take this down to 2 maybe. There we go. Or maybe even just turn off the bevel. Maybe we'll go with angular. Angular's kind of nice. And we can give this type of color. Maybe make it that baby blue. Kind of like that. There we go. And then again, if I grab my lights, maybe pull them back a little bit further in Z depth. That's better. This is all happening right inside of After Effects. Okay, the only thing we can't do is cast shadows on the switch. We'd have to make the type inside of Cinema 4D Light to do that, which we can. Okay, but if I wanted to quickly composite a title right over the existing three-dimensional model, I can do that. I can composite behind it. Let's grab this type. We know that it has to go, well, let's duplicate it first. We know that it has to go past 0 on the Z, and that's past 0. So let's grab this type, highlight this. And we'll just call this type behind the switch, right? Then we can put this behind our Cinema 4D layer, because even though we're using 3D, when we use a Cinema 4D layer, because not everything carries over in a 3D fashion, I actually have to use good old-fashioned layering. Right? You can see that type is definitely behind the switch like it is in the scene. Okay? So, long story short, I'm getting really good interaction with my tools right inside of After Effects. Let's make this light setting, let's make sure that this is ambient. There we go. That's better. Right inside of After Effects, everything that would take 4 times as long easily, because we'd have to set all this up in one program, make sure that it was going to work in the next program, render it out of one program, and then import it, and then reset everything again. Okay, that's a lot of work. That's why this feature exists. That's why it's built into the software. And that's why we're talking about it. Okay. So now we've got all these elements interacting with each other, and they're not even all made in the same one program. Again, we've got the resolution dialed down to about half right now. But if we zoomed in and turned it up, Cinema 4D is going to have to render the switch, which will take an extra minute. But this is going to look really nice. There it is. Okay? So a lot of options as far as what we can do when we're using Cinema 4D Lite. In fact, when you get into the advanced class, the 2570 class, Advanced After Effects, you're going to have projects like this one. This whole entire low poly planet was built inside of Cinema 4D Lite. And we're animating all the elements over the top inside of After Effects. So the callouts are all coming from After Effects, that cool little line that animates and lands on the objects. That's from After Effects. Our glow, our stars, the environment, the color grading, all that happened, and everything only had to be rendered once. Okay, as opposed to out of 3D and then into After Effects and then render again. We didn't have to go through that pipeline. Okay, which might not sound like a lot of work right now, or even a lot of work in general for a 5-second animation, but believe it or not, that adds up hugely. Okay, and again, classes like the ones that we offer here and people like EJ are the resources you're going to want to access if you want to add that level of interactivity to your work. And you will. You will have to at some point. Okay? Now, I could go on about Cinema 4D, and I'd love to, but there are things about our current project that aren't bonus that we need to talk about. So let's maybe table the old switch controller for now. And let's jump back over to our demo controller. I'm going to close this demo type. We're going to click there. We'll drag this over to here. And this is the controller that we played around with in the last class. We talked about setting up controls, like I said earlier, to be able to animate effectively this object. Now, we've only got 4 buttons. I should probably put a cross pad on here. So let's look at how we can add something to this before we start animating. I'm going to turn off my working camera. And with no camera turned on, After Effects is going to default this view to a flat view of everything. Okay, not completely flat. There's still a little bit of perspective in the shot, but it's looking at this from the origin point, which is 960 by 540 at 0. Okay. I'm going to also set my quality to half temporarily. And that'll speed this up as well. And what I want to do is first separate some of these buttons, or at least make sure that they're separated. So let's solo these. It looks like they are, so that's good. And that's because I'm going to want to animate these buttons individually and set up controls to be able to do so. Okay? So that's one thing, and it looks like we're good there. I'm going to also, like I said, add a cross pad to this. Now I've got paths already drawn, and I can access them probably from any one of these layers if I just simply duplicate and turn one on. But instead, I'm going to come in here and add my own shape. Okay? And let's jump into, instead of using this active camera view, let's make this really easy. Let's jump over to front view. Okay, and that'll get rid of the perspective that we're seeing as well. And we're going to grab the rounded rectangle tool. We're just going to draw a shape, maybe right about here. That looks good. And I'm going to grab the pan behind tool and the layer and use the command key to snap that right into position. Let's bring up position. Let's make this a 3D layer. And let's maybe push this to right about there, and then push this up to right about there. So that looks pretty good. I think I could thin this down slightly. We'll call this layer cross pad. We'll spell it the American way instead of the idiot Tasmanian way that I spelled it. And let's go under contents where we see rectangle. And let's just change the thickness of this to maybe 75. That looks better. And the roundness, let's take that down to about 10. So this is our shape. We can see it outlined. Okay. We're going to need to play around with our fill and stroke on this object once we get it into position after we extrude it. So let's maybe extrude it right now just so that we can start to see the shape. So geometry options, we'll come under here, choose extrusion depth. We'll start with a crazy value like 100. And let's go to our side view, left or right, doesn't really matter. And we can see that the thickness is there. Let's maybe take this and flip the object. Okay? So here's a little trick, and we're going to do this with the cross pad, and you'll see why in a little bit. I'm going to bring up rotation. I'm going to rotate this on the X 180 degrees. And when I do that, it takes the object and it spins it around on the axis, which points what was building in a positive direction, the extrude, and it flips it so that it's now facing the negative direction, or toward the camera. Okay? And then we're going to back this up a little bit, maybe to right about there. And then we don't need this to be so thick. So let's find our geometry options and take this number down to like 20. Maybe we'll beef it up to 40. That looks pretty good. We'll split the difference. We'll say 30. There we go. I like that. And let's turn on another bevel. We'll go convex. We'll make this maybe 4 or 5. Start with 4. And let's go back to our front view. And there's one part of the cross pad. I think we could thin it even a little bit more. So let's go back under contents. We can do this with or without the extrude being on there. Let's take this number to maybe 60. Yeah, I like that better. And then for this layer, let's make sure that shadows are turned on so we can cast them. We want to see that nice shadow being cast across this little object. And I don't like how bright this pink is, so I'm going to grab this color, grab a more muted version of it, maybe darken it. That's better. And then we'll take this rectangle and we'll duplicate it, Command D, and then rotate it. And now we've got a cross pad. I can also take this, let's duplicate it, we'll call this cross pad maybe edge. And let's flip this. Let's make the fill nothing. And let's give the stroke a value. I like that gray. And let's maybe make it 6 pixels in thickness. There we go. Then if we go to the left view, we can kind of back this up. And put that right there. So now we've got our cross pad edge, we've got our cross pad. Let's move these objects into our layer stack. And then let's look at this again from our active camera view. That'll give us a little bit of perspective. And that's looking pretty good. I could even give this a little more thickness. Let's grab this and make this maybe 8 pixels. And that's a little better. Okay, So let's say we like that. So we've got a controller. It's got all the elements that we wanted. I think the thickness on our bevel for cross pad can come down slightly. Maybe we'll make this 2. That thins it up a little bit. Let's make sure that this is parented to our controller. The controller is our null object. Okay, and right now we're using this to move our device. Okay, so let's grab controller and let's maybe solo this. And let's play around with our controller. Let's bring up position. Let's set a keyframe at 0 and at 1 second with the controller right in the middle. And then we're going to back up to 0 and move this controller off screen. And now the controller is going to come in like so and land right there. Okay, now we can't see it because it's set to be invisible because it's a null. So the only way we're going to be able to see it is if we select and then just kind of move. Okay, unless we start turning on layers, which we can do. Okay, and we might do that in a moment or two. But I want to bring this in before we do, and I want to start to play with my keyframes on this null. Okay, and I can do that much easier if I've got the other items turned off, so I don't have to wait for them to redraw. So I'm going to go under keyframe interpolation. I'm going to turn off the Bezier for spatial interpolation and set this to linear because I don't want handles. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the motion of this and we're going to separate this into dimensions. We're going to get into this a lot in the next lesson. But I'm going to right click, right on the word position and choose separate dimensions. That gives us X, Y, and Z. And we're not moving the object from side to side right now. We're not moving the object away or toward us. So I can turn off keyframing for Z and for X. I just want to function working with the Y keyframes. Okay, because that's the only axis that I'm animating this null on right now. Okay? So separate dimensions allows us to do this. And I can hit the U key now that I've deleted those keyframes. Now these are the only ones that I see. I'm going to select these keyframes and set them to easy ease. And then I'm going to go into Graph Editor. Okay? Now up until now we've played around with the speed graph, which has been great for us. But there's a better graph that we're going to see a lot more in the next lesson, and that is the value graph. Okay? The value graph we can get to by clicking on this little drop down. I'm going to choose that right here. And this one's just easier to work with because visually it just makes more sense. It's harder to get to, and we can't use this unless we separate dimensions for position. But since we did, now we can use this graph. And I want the animation to start very quickly. So I'm going to try and get this line to be as vertical as possible. Okay, the more vertical the line, the faster something moves. The more horizontal, the slower it moves. Okay, so I want this to start at a relatively fast speed. And then I want it to slow down, but I want it to overshoot. I want it to come down and kind of bounce a little bit. Okay, so watch how easy it is to set this up using the value graph. I'm going to zoom in on the graph. I'm going to expand this a little bit so that I got some room to work. And let's say I want this to overshoot and then come back to this point, maybe down the timeline. Let's go to, we're at 1 second. Let's go to 1 second and, 12 frames. I'm going to hold down the Command key and add a keyframe right there. Just like if I hit the Add Keyframe button right here. Now I'm going to go back to this keyframe. I'm going to click and drag it upward slightly, which is going to start that overshoot, right? See how it's starting to push this down? And let's go forward about 4 frames. Let's click and add another keyframe and pull this directly down, but not quite as far from 0 as this one is. See how there's a distance from here to there? We're going less than that on this keyframe. And then we'll add one right here, and we'll go less still. And then maybe we'll add one right there, and we'll go less still. And we've got this nice little what we call oscillation happening. And if I grab all of my keyframes at once, I can smooth out these curves. Okay, and now that I've got those curves smoothed out, take a look at that animation. That looks pretty good. Again, it's hard to see without an object, so now that we've got this set up, let's turn on something simple like CrossPad. And that bounce looks nice. It just is happening a little bit too rapidly and too much, so we're going to turn this curve down a little bit, maybe straighten this line out, and then we're going to grab these points and we want to kind of smush them together, okay? Bring these values closer to each other. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we've got, again, the ability to work based on an anchor point. I'm going to move that to right there, okay? And now, let's Command Z that. If that's sitting right in the center, and I hold down the, I'm going to get this to work, Command key, I can smush these together, okay? Which lessens that bounce. And if that's too much, I can stretch them back out, okay? So let's play this again. Still the same motion, but just less of it. Let's take a look at how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I think that's a little bit too little. So let's take these again, hold down the Command key, and pull them back out just a little bit, maybe to there. And then we'll play with these handles a little bit. Maybe we'll grab this first value and pull it up a little higher too. And maybe we want to have this happen sooner. So I can select all these keyframes and just move them up. That looks nice, right? That feels really good. Let's maybe pull that keyframe over slightly. And we're doing all this using the value graph, and it's all happening on the null. Okay, now here's the cool thing about that. We did that on the null. Let's turn off all of that shying that we did. Okay, all of that soloing. And let's play this again. And again, it takes a second or two to be able to see this because obviously the object has to kind of move into place. And we're looking at this through a half resolution lens, right? So we have to keep that in mind too when we consider rendering and everything else. So let's play this back. So we have that nice little move now. Okay, and again, it's a little slow. So let's grab our keyframes. We already know that these are working fairly well. We just want to change the timing. We can pull these up. We can also select these and squish these together. Okay, if I select all my keyframes that I want to manipulate and then hold down the Option key, I can click and drag and push these elements together to make them happen a little faster. So let's say I want to squeeze that together a little bit. The only thing I'm going to have to do is make sure that the keyframes actually sit properly inside of After Effects. And what that means is if you push them together, sometimes you'll put them in between frames, and we don't want to do that. So there we go. So we kind of squish this together. We adjusted. This is going to look really nice. But before we start to play with that, let's go to the point where we can see this object again. Let's take a look at our null. Let's go into maybe our left view. Now we can see that this null doesn't quite sit in the middle of where our chord is. Okay? So we're going to make a new null. We're going to make that a 3D layer. And we're going to call this chord rotation. Okay, or chord rot for short. And I'm going to back this up so that it looks like it's right in the middle of where the chord is. So, right about there. I'm going to take this controller and parent it to chord rotation. Okay? I'm going to take chord rotation, bring up rotation, and I'm going to set a keyframe for Y, and we'll make the first value, let's go into our working camera view here. And let's maybe turn this way, so maybe -30, or 30 rather. And then we'll go to the end of the animation. And we'll make this -30. Okay? And we're using our working camera. Let's just set this to active camera. And we put animation on this in the last class, I believe, our working camera. I'm going to get rid of that. So let's turn off all this animation and we'll start that process from scratch. So this is going to be our main camera. But now, if we let this play, the controller drops in as it's rotating. We can see that right there. I think we can speed this up even faster. Let's grab our keyframes. Let's take this to maybe 10. Then we'll take a look at our curves. And let's do that. Let's set this to quarter res. See if we can get this to preview a little bit faster. That's looking pretty good. And we can grab our controller, because right now it's moving along the Y position. Okay. Maybe when it falls, it moves along the X. So let's bring up position. We'll set a keyframe there. We'll set a keyframe here. Maybe there. And let's just pull this way a little bit. And we'll ease those keyframes as well. So now it kind of drops in and it's kind of moving a little bit, almost like it's swinging slightly, and we could put overshoot on that. You can kind of feel it moving. There we go. Now let's maybe grab these two keyframes and pull them apart just a smidge. Now again, what's cool about this is we're spending all this time tweaking the animation. Why? Because it was very easy to get our objects into the scene. Now let's look at how we can take the controls, the actual buttons that we have here, and make animating those just as simple as what we saw a second ago. Now, I'm going to grab this controller. We're going to lock chord rotation, because that's just for the rotation of the chord, which is the whole controller. Let's grab this controller, and let's say from here we want to add some effects controls that we can actually play around with. Okay, now we mentioned buttons before. Let's look at our buttons right here, 1 through 4. Okay, and what do we have to work with? Let's go under Contents. Let's take a look at our shapes here. This is button 1, which is that orange button. Okay, we've got group 12 here turned on, right? Under Contents down here is Geometry Options. We've got an extrusion depth that's set to 40 right now. Okay, and if we take this value and we change it, we could change the shape. That's just going to, make that change in the wrong direction. So what about the actual object, right? We can move this in X, Y, and Z, right? Right now it's set to -80. Okay, so let's move this. Let's see what happens. So if I move this towards 0 to -37, it looks like that button is just totally depressed there, right? It's actually going into the controller. So let's take this from -80 to maybe -60. Okay? And that looks like it's depressed. This doesn't look like it's going all the way into the controller. Maybe -55. Okay? So that looks pretty good. So we know that Z position from -80 to -55 is the button depth, okay, or range of motion. Let's call it that. We want to be able to control that and not have to come all the way down here and know those numbers to be able to make this work. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take that information and we're going to put it into our controller null. So I'm going to grab controller and I'll just keep it called, well, yeah, I'll just let it stay control. No, I can't. See, OCD's kicking in. We're going to call this controller and animate controls. Now we can change the name of this. That's not going to hurt anything. This way you'll know exactly what you're looking at, because that's really what this is about to become. And with this layer selected, I'm going to go under Effects and Presets, and I'm going to add a thing called a slider control. Okay, and we're going to put slider control right here. Okay, and that's going to show up right here. With slider control, if I right-click and choose Edit Value, I can add a slider range. Okay, so I'm going to click on this first value and type -55. Then I'm going to click on this second value and type, or actually that's reversed. I want this to be -80. Then I want this to be -55. Okay? And now we're going to cycle between those numbers on this slider. See that right there? I'm going to call this button 1. pressed. Okay? What I want to do is I want to get this number right here to talk to this slider and use whatever this value is. Okay, so here's the magic little dab of salt in the form of expressions we're about to sprinkle. I'm going to hold down the Option key. I'm going to Option click expression. Okay, or Option click the stopwatch, excuse me. That's going to open up the expression field. And what I want to do is I want to link just this value to this number right here. Okay? So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to grab the pick whip and I'm going to drag this up to slider. Okay? So I grab the pick whip, dragging it up to slider for button 01 pressed. I'm going to let go. And we get all this information. Okay? Basically, this first line is pointing, let's turn that off, is pointing After Effects to the controller and animate controls null, to the effect, button 01 pressed, to the value of that slider. Okay? And it's taking that value and it's making the number for X, Y, and Z that value. Okay? Now I'm going to get rid of the word temp because I think that just looks weird. And we're going to call this B01, okay, for button 01. And I want the number to change for B01 on the Z-axis. So I'm going to put B01 into this Z-axis field, okay? Now everything's going to break, and that's okay, because we're going to fix this. But I want to turn off the window that we saw for a second because I want to talk about what's occurring here. We've defined a variable, okay? B01 is a variable. Defining it is what we're doing with the equal sign. Okay, we're saying, okay, B01 is going to contain this number. Okay, and the number that it's going to contain is the number we're generating up here between negative 80 and negative 55. Okay, so all we did was we made a container and we put whatever this value ends up being into that container, and then we made one of the three numbers for position coordinates for button 1 the number in that container. Okay, it sounds more complex than it actually is, and it's really super simple. What we need to do now is make After Effects ignore the first two slots, which is the X and the Y position. Okay, now there's a way to do that. We tell After Effects, use the numeric value that already exists. And we do that by using the word value, and then in brackets, okay, and After Effects tries to type this for us, we put in the axis number. Okay? Why not a letter? X, Y, and Z are the axes. Why not X, Y, or Z? Because After Effects doesn't understand letters like that. Any letter and combination of numbers it sees, it wants to consider to be a variable, unless it's predefined as a function or a behavior. Okay? Or it's in quotes. If it's in quotes, then it sees it. If it's not in quotes, then it doesn't. Okay? Instead, the x-axis is 0 in expression script, okay, or extend script, in After Effects language. The y-axis is 1. So if I type 0 in brackets, it's going to see that as whatever the value that this was before, and you can see that number pop back up. So let's do the same thing for the y-axis. Value, bracket, and then the number 1 inside the brackets, and suddenly this works. Now what's really cool is I can now animate that button by changing this slider. Okay? Now here's where it gets really cool. I'm going to take this controller, duplicate it, duplicate it, duplicate it. We're going to call this button 02 pressed, button 03 pressed, button 04 pressed. I'm going to take this expression, now that we've created it, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to lock button 1, I'm going to go over to button 2. I'm going to find that button, the position for it under transform. I'm going to option click the position stopwatch. I'm going to paste that in there. I want this to work off of button 02, so I'm going to change the variable name to B02 just to do it. You don't really have to, but if we're keeping this organized, we'll change the effect to B02 or button 02 pressed. And now that works for button 2. Okay. Button 2 is actually over here. Okay. So we might want to think about our layer order, but that's okay. We'll just go through and set these up, and then we'll reorder our controller. Let's go under button 3. Option click, paste, B03, B03, and if this becomes too hard to see, you can always expand this. It's a little weird, but you can actually select this edge and expand it. There we go. And then finally button 4. So position, let's just open this field right up by hitting the P key. And if everything is working, this will be an equal sign for your expression, and you won't see an orange bar at the bottom of your screen. So now let's go back up to our controller here. And button 01 pressed, let's set that to -55. That's that one. Button 02 pressed. That's this one over here. And let's call this maybe OL, okay, for orange left. This one is red right, so RR. And then this one, we pull that all the way over. That's orange top, so maybe we can put that in between these two. We can move these controls around. And this one would be red bottom. So now all we have to do is figure out where we want to start animating these buttons, right? This starts to move in, maybe at 15, yeah, 1 second and 15 frames. We want to start to animate a couple of these buttons. Let's say we want to animate the, let's go with our first one. Okay, we'll set a keyframe at 80. Maybe we'll jump forward 3 frames, maybe 4 frames. We'll drag this slider over. That sets another keyframe, right? And then let's bring up our animated keyframes here by hitting the U key. Then I can jump down 4 more frames and then drag this back. Okay. So now that button depresses. We can see that right there. If I want that to happen faster, I can grab that, pull it in, pull that a little closer. Once I have the right speed, I can take these keyframes and copy and paste them down the timeline. And I'm pasting the last keyframe, or I should say I'm pasting right on the last keyframe, the first keyframe. And that's going to give me that. So I'm cycling from negative 80 to negative 55, back to negative 80 again. And that gives me that. And I can ease those keyframes if I want to. But let's say I don't. Let me grab all of these keyframes. Let me copy them. And let's go to button 03. What's this one? Orange top. Let's set a keyframe for orange top right there. Let's hit the U. Let's paste those copied keyframes. It's the same numbers, right? So I can switch right over to the top button, maybe right there. Maybe we delete these keyframes. Maybe we set a keyframe for the red right button. We'll hit the U key again twice so I can bring up keyframes. Let's paste. Put those there. And maybe right there, we delete these keyframes. Maybe go back up to the top button. Paste a few more keyframes in here. It's the same value. Right? We go from negative 80 down. And let's go back to maybe right there. We'll delete these. And then let's push that last button since we set it up. Okay. So now this drops down. And then as soon as it starts to spin, we're almost there. Boom. And again, this is all happening from one layer. We're controlling multiple buttons. We're able to decide when and which ones to push. And we're only using just a tiny sprinkling of code knowledge to get this done. It's mostly just pick whipping and editing. Okay? Now let's play that back. That making sense? There's tons that we can do. Okay. Last thing I'll show you, because it's going to give us one more controller. Let's come in here and grab a new null. Layer, new, null object. Let's call this cross controller. I'm just going to make this easy. So we're going to take this. We're going to turn on 3D. We're going to hold down the pick whip and shift and click on crosspad. Okay? Because we want this to snap to the crosspad right there. Okay? Now I'm going to want to rotate this or scale this, whichever one it is, or position. Orientation, yeah. Well, whatever. I was going to change the value back, but it looks like it won't matter because this is connected to crosspad, so let's set this to none. Now I can change this. There we go. Let's grab this and set that to 0. And let's also grab this value and set that to 0 as well. Yep, there we are. And what we're going to do is we're going to take cross controller, put that next to cross pad. We're going to parent this to controller. We're going to parent cross pad to this. Because cross controller is what we're going to animate now. Okay? And we can rotate this on the X, we can rotate this on the Y. Those are both numeric values. So I can grab controller and animate controls and use this. Okay? But I'm going to use a different kind of control. I'm going to use angle. Okay? So let's grab angle control and drop that here as well. And it starts at 0. Let's click on our chord, not our chord rotation, our cross controller here. Let's bring up rotation. Notice how these values start at 0. Okay? I'm going to click on my controller here. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this cross pad or just cross, rotate H, and let's actually just duplicate this. And we'll call this cross, rotate V. Okay? So the pad can kind of move this way, it can also move this way, right? So I'm going to grab my cross controller. I'm going to take X rotation, which would be this. I'm going to option click the stopwatch. And I'm going to drag this to horizontal angle. Y rotation, I'm going to option click the stopwatch. I'm going to drag that to vertical angle. Okay. Now, if we look at the controller, you can see that it's rotating like that. It's also rotating like that. If we turn on the cross pad, we do the same thing. I can control it this way. I can also control it that way. And if I turn on the cross pad edge, now I can see both of these elements together. Let's set this to maybe half res. And I can check this, right? See how far I want to rotate it? It looks like not much, right? If I go maybe 4 degrees, 3 degrees, that's enough, right? So now, I can use these values to rotate the cross pad, and that's turned on. So let's back up, let's hit the space bar, that comes in. Right, we know we have some animation that comes up not long after this with the buttons. So maybe right here is a good place to start animating the angle. So let's grab the controls here. We'll set keyframes. And let's go to maybe 3. And let's hit the U key so we can see these keyframes. Right, and I want it to stay 0 on the vertical, so let's add a keyframe there. And let's maybe go 1, 2, 3, 4 keyframes. I think 4 is going to be a good number for that. And let's set this to -3 and 0 again. And let's keep it there for a little bit. Then we'll set keyframes to hold that position. Jump forward 4 keyframes. Maybe we'll set this now to 3 and this value to -3, right? So it's kind of leaning on this edge right here. And then maybe 10 frames later, we set this to 0, and we set vertical rotation to 3. Maybe that stays like that for a little bit until maybe right there, in which case we can reverse this. We'll set a keyframe, jump forward 4 frames, and make this -3. And then maybe at 10 frames, we'll set this back to 0. So now we've got a cross-pad animation, right? And really, there's only one layer with most of our keyframing. And we're able to check all this and make sure that it's working. I like the motion on the cross pad. I think that it could be maybe increased slightly. But really what needs to be increased is that edge. Let's take this up to maybe 12. That's better. Because I think that our cross pad was crossing through in a couple of spots. And it's a subtle animation, but you can definitely see it. That looks pretty cool. Now let's lock these down. Let's maybe turn off the shining, which brings everything back. Hit the space bar. Let's actually set this to a quarter res here. I'm just waiting for a couple of the buttons to move here. They should be starting any second now. You can already see the cross pad moving, and there goes our orange button, our left orange button. That's moving. And again, because of how this is set up, if I go into Controller and select Animate Controls, and I go back into Graph Editor, and I hit the U key twice, I can click on Y position, I can grab these Graph Editor points and just expand them a little bit. So I think this could be expanded slightly, get a little more overshoot in there. Yeah, I like that. Let's maybe grab these keyframes, give them a little more room to breathe. There we go. And it takes nothing to do this, which means we can really get in here and nuance the animation. We haven't even animated the camera, right? So now I can take this camera, and we've got attached to your handout the video that discusses in detail how to animate the After Effects 3D camera. Now I can take this camera, add just a slight amount of motion to the camera. Maybe we just turn it slightly and zoom in a little bit. Might even be a little bit too far, but we'll go with it for now. That looks pretty good. And there we are. And again, it works with anything inside of After Effects. You guys created those little target animations. Some of you even used them in your interfaces, which is good. Let's go into, let's try and find that real quick. All right, so here's this little animation that we set up, right? So let's take this. We'll jump into our controller demo. We'll drop this in here. Make it a 3D layer. Maybe set it to screen. Well, we can't do that actually because we're dealing with Cinema 4D. That's right. We're probably not going to need to because we can just set this whole thing to a brighter color if that's gray. Yeah, we'll just grab maybe fill. Just drop the fill effect on here. And we'll make this white. There we go. So here's this. Let's check out our position, make sure it's in front. All right, and the point is to show that this can work as three-dimensional items with everything that we've already created inside of After Effects that are two-dimensional items. So now we turn that layer into a three-dimensional layer. We can see that animating. We can see our 3D animating. Okay. So there you go. So we'll let this, actually with that turned off, we'll let this play. And I'm going to save this. And I'm going to put this demonstration up on the server, or actually on Vimeo, sorry, not the server. We don't do that. And I want you to use this so that you can really get in and set up a file that's going to be successful to work with, okay? That's why we use all these tools. It's why we learn how to use expressions, and we use controllers that are actually null layers. We do all this so that when we get into really animating and we're trying to kind of tweak what we're making so that it's exactly the feel that we're going for, we want to make that process as easy and creative as we possibly can, okay? And it takes a bit to describe this stuff, but boy, oh boy, is it worth it. Okay. Just the amount of time we spent setting that up is going to probably save you, if you followed even half of that, 3 times the amount of effort that it took to go through and show you how to use those tools. So as you're setting up your animations, because everybody's controllers are coming together, I want you to think about adding controls so that you can adequately go in and animate everything that you've got and make changes, because you'll see things like I did several times over and say, this is working, that's not working. I'm going to add this, I'm going to change that. You want to be able to do that in your work, okay? All right, so we'll let this play. We'll let our movie save. We'll flip the music back on. And you guys are free to use the rest of your time to work away on this project.
Chug of Mobil 1 full synthetic motor oil is just $26.99. Plus, get a treat, a $10 Visa gift card.
Good luck with today's lesson.